Jinho wakes up promptly at 6 in the morning. His eyes open effortlessly. He doesn't hear the alarm because he doesn't need one. His internal clock is precise. He gets out of bed with a single movement. His body obeys his mind without question. He goes into the bathroom. He turns on the water. The temperature has to be just right. He washes quickly and efficiently. Every movement has a purpose. He shaves. The blade glides over his skin without leaving a cut. This is the result of practice and control. He gets dressed. The clothes are lying on a chair, laid out by the maid the day before. Simple trousers, a simple shirt. Nothing extra, nothing flashy. Everything is functional. Everything is comfortable. He goes down to the dining room. His steps are even. He sits down at the table. There's already a cup of black coffee on the table. He raises it to his lips. The coffee is the right temperature. It doesn't burn his tongue. It's logical. It's right. He picks up a tablet. He reads the reports. It's not news. It's data. Numbers. Reports. He analyzes the information. He makes plans. His brain works like a computer. He calculates options. He sees connections. He makes decisions based on facts. He doesn't believe in superstitions. He considers them stupid. For him, omens are people's fear of the unknown. He doesn't believe in premonitions. He considers them emotions. Emotions interfere with clear thinking. He relies only on logic, only on common sense. If something happens in his life, it happens because he achieved it, or because he allowed it. For him, coincidences don't exist. Coincidence is just a word for the weak, for those who can't control their lives. In his world, everything goes according to plan. His plan. If the plan is disrupted, he finds a reason. He corrects the error. He restores order. His world is built of stone and steel. There is no room for wind in this world. No room for unpredictability. Everything is solid. Everything is reliable. Everything is under control. Molly wakes up before him. Her room is small. It's simple. But for Molly, the world isn't simple. For Molly, the world is full of signs. She gets up, and the first thing she does is look out the window. She looks at the sky. What color is it? What clouds are there? She looks at the trees. How are the branches swaying? She listens to the birds. What birds are singing? For her, it's not just morning. It's a message. She reads the world like a book. She goes to the kitchen. She's making breakfast for Jinho, but her mind isn't just on recipes. She senses things. She notices little things. If milk curdles even though the expiration date is right, it's a sign. If an eggshell falls and cracks in a certain way, it's a sign. If she accidentally drops a spoon and it clanks a certain way, it's a sign. Molly has a secret, a big secret. All the women in her family had a gift. They could see the future. Her grandmother could tell you exactly what would happen to you. She would take your hand and tell you. People paid her money. They stood in line outside her house. Her mother was even stronger. She didn't need to hold your hand. All she had to do was look you in the eye. She saw illnesses. She saw betrayals. She saw accidents before they happened. She predicted a fire in the neighboring house. After that, even more people came to her. She took even more money. But Molly fears this gift. She's been afraid of it since childhood. She remembers her mother once telling a woman not to marry a man named John. Her mother said he would bring her grief. The woman listened. She broke up with him. A year later, this John died in a car accident. Molly always wondered, what if she had married him? Maybe he would have acted differently. Maybe he wouldn't have gone that way. She realized that one word from her could change everything. And she was afraid of this power. She was afraid of the responsibility. She didn't want to make a mistake and hurt someone, so she made a promise to herself. She would never tell anyone about her gift. She would be an ordinary maid. She would wash floors. She would cook. She would iron shirts. Her gift would sleep. She would lock it away. She gets a job with Jinho. He's a logical man. He won't believe her fairy tales. It's the perfect place to hide. But hiding is proving difficult. Her gift doesn't sleep. It whispers to her. One morning, as Jinho is about to get into his car, Molly suddenly sees a clear image in her mind. She sees the car start, drive a few meters, and then black smoke billows out from under the hood. She smells something burning. She knows it's true. She stands in the doorway and watches him approach the car. Her breath catches. She must speak. She must warn him, but the words won't come. She imagines his face. He'll ask, "How do you know?" She won't be able to answer. He'll laugh. He'll think she's crazy, or worse, he'll start to suspect. He'll start asking questions. He'll find out her secret. The fear becomes stronger. She remains silent. She turns away and pretends to dust the shelf in the hallway. She hears the engine start. She hears the car drive away. All day she walks in a daze. She waits for a call. But there is no call. Later, she learns that the driver smelled a strange odor and took the car to a mechanic before Jinho got behind the wheel. The mechanics found a fault in the fuel system. Her vision was correct. But she did nothing. She feels ashamed, very ashamed. Another time, Jinho is preparing for an important deal. He's meeting with new partners. Molly serves him coffee before the meeting. As her fingers touch the cup's handle, a cold shiver runs down her spine. A whisper rings in her ears. Lies. They're lying! She feels it with her whole being. These people are deceiving him. She looks at him. He's confident. He's calculated all the numbers. He's checked all the documents. He trusts his logic, but she trusts her instincts. And her instincts scream about danger. And again she is silent. She lowers her eyes and leaves with the tray. She washes the dishes in the kitchen, and her hands are shaking. She knows she is betraying him. She could help. She could at least hint. But she is afraid. Afraid of his reaction. Afraid of the consequences. A few days later, she sees him looking gloomy. The deal fell through. The partners turned out to be scammers. Jinho is losing a large sum of money. He doesn't get openly angry. He simply sits in his office and goes over all the calculations. He searches for a flaw in the logic. He can't find one. For him, it's an annoying anomaly. A glitch in the system. For Molly, this is proof. Proof of her guilt. She stands outside his office door and feels a searing shame rise in her chest. She could have prevented this. She should have spoken, but her fear was stronger. She promises herself that next time she will speak. But next time comes, and again silence seems safer. She lives with this burden. Shame becomes her shadow. She gets used to it. She learns to ignore the inner voices. She silences her visions. She does her job flawlessly. She is the perfect servant and an unhappy woman. But today is different. This morning, everything has been wrong. The signs are too strong. They are too insistent. They are blaring, screaming in her ears. Her gift, long dormant, awakens with incredible force. And this morning shows her that silence is no longer an option, that the quiet whisper has turned into a deafening scream, and that she must speak, no matter the cost. Molly's morning begins with anxiety. She doesn't yet know why, but she feels a slight tension in the air. Today is Jinho's day off, and usually such days are calmer, but her internal barometer points to a storm. She starts making breakfast. Today, it's his favorite pancakes. Molly knows the recipe exactly. She measures out the flour, eggs, and milk. She adds a pinch of salt and just the right amount of sugar Jinho likes, so the pancakes are slightly sweet, but not cloying. She heats the pan and pours in the batter. Everything goes as usual. While she's cooking, she glances at her tablet screen. She's opened her daily horoscope. It's her little ritual. She doesn't always follow it, but she reads it constantly. Today, her gaze falls on the forecast for Leo. It reads in large letters, "Caution, Leo." Today, the stars warn of hidden danger. Don't take risks. Postpone important trips. Molly pauses for a second. Jinho is a Leo. She knows it. But she pushes the thought away. Nonsense, she tells herself. It's his day off. No trips. She returns to her pancakes. And this is where things get weird. She takes the first pancake off the pan and tries the edge. It's completely bland. As if she forgot the sugar. But she clearly remembers adding it. She shrugs, chalking it up to her absent-mindedness, and pours in more batter. The second pancake burns at the edges, even though the temperature is the same. The third tears when she tries to flip it. Molly frowns. She's never had problems with pancakes. She throws out the bad ones and starts the whole process over again, this time paying double attention to every step. She makes the second batch perfectly, but a feeling of slight irritation and confusion has already settled inside her. These minor failures are a sign. She can feel it. But what kind? Breakfast is ready. Before Jinho comes down, she decides to iron his shirt for tomorrow. She turns on the iron and checks the settings. Everything is correct. She runs the iron over the white cotton shirt, perfectly laid out on the ironing board. Suddenly, a sharp hissing sound is heard. A faint steam rises from the shirt, and the smell of burning fabric fills it. Molly freezes, staring in horror at the dark burn mark on her chest, right above where her heart should be. She pulls the iron away. Her hands begin to shake. She looks at the damage, expecting to see a shapeless brown stain. But it's not a stain. It's a crisp, almost painted pattern. It resembles the outline of an airplane, not a modern airliner, but rather an older one, with straight wings and a tail. The lines of the charred fabric form a recognizable silhouette. A chill runs down Molly's spine. She takes a step back, unable to tear her eyes away from the sign, her mind racing. An airplane. Why an airplane? She goes over Jinho's plans for the day in her head. He said he'd be home all day. Maybe have dinner out tonight, but it's in the city, not far. No business trips, no flights. She checked his calendar while cleaning his office. It's spotless. She stands in the middle of the kitchen, clutching the still warm iron, and looks at the ruined shirt. Astro forecast. Unsweetened and burnt pancakes. And now this plane. Too many coincidences for one morning. Too many signs to ignore. Her gift, which she tried so hard to suppress, is sounding the alarm. She senses impending disaster. She doesn't know where it will come from, doesn't know when. But she is absolutely certain it is connected to the plane. And this is what scares her most. Because logic, Jinho's logic, tells her there can be no danger from flying today, but her instincts scream the opposite. And for the first time in a long time, she doesn't know who to trust, but her fear for his life begins to outweigh her fear of exposure. Jinho finishes his coffee. The morning seems as calm and predictable as ever. He sets the porcelain cup on the saucer with a soft, barely audible clink. The sound brings the first part of his morning ritual to a close. He's already got a plan for the day mapped out in his head. A few hours reading reports, then a workout, maybe a quick call about one of his current projects. Nothing urgent, nothing that could disrupt the perfect geometry of his day off. "Can I have it, sir?" Molly's voice comes from somewhere off to the side, quiet and a little tense. He nods briefly, not taking his eyes off the tablet screen. He hears her pick up her cup and head into the kitchen. Her steps seem a little more hurried than usual, but he doesn't pay it any mind. It's human nature to fuss sometimes. In the kitchen, Molly freezes at the sink. She sees the grounds. She sees the overturned plane. The world shrinks to the size of a coffee cup. All the previous signs, the unsweetened pancakes, the burnt edges, the scorched shirt, were mere whispers. Now her gift screams in her ear, deafening and undeniable. It's no longer a premonition. It's knowing. She's absolutely certain. There's not a shred of doubt left in her body. She stands, leaning against the counter, trying to catch her breath. Her hands are shaking. She stares at the pattern until it begins to blur before her eyes. She needs to pull herself together. She needs to go and serve breakfast. She washes her cup with desperate energy, as if trying to wash the vision from it, erase it from reality. But the image is seared into her memory forever. Gathering her strength, she brings out a plate of perfect golden pancakes. She places it in front of Jinho, and her fingers tremble again. She can't bring herself to leave. She freezes next to the table, her gaze fixed on him, filled with such silent horror and anxiety that even the introverted Jinho can't help but sense it. He slowly looks up at her. His gaze, cold, analytical, emotionless, slides over her face. He sees her paleness, her wide eyes, the slight trembling in her hands. "What's the matter?" he asks. His voice is even, but there's a hint of irritation in it. Her behavior doesn't fit into the usual mold. It's an anomaly. And he doesn't like anomalies. Molly opens her mouth to say something. Anything, but the words stick in her throat. Where to begin? "I see the future in the coffee grounds." He tells her to leave and never come back, or worse. And at that very moment, as if obeying some evil fate, the phone in the pocket of his robe quietly vibrates. Jinho is distracted, takes out his phone. He looks at the screen, and his face becomes serious. He accepts the call. "Yes," he says shortly. He listens for a few seconds, his eyebrows furrowing slightly. "When?" "I see. No, it's urgent. Arrange for the earliest possible flight. Private terminal. Yes, I'll be leaving within the hour." He places his phone on the table. His plans for the day have just been upended, but there's no annoyance or surprise on his face. There's only a quick switch to a new task. For him, this isn't a disaster, just a change in route. He looks back at Molly, still standing rooted to the spot. "Plans are changing," he says, his voice devoid of emotion. "My aunt is in Seoul. She's had a sudden flare-up of an old condition. She urgently needs medication that can only be purchased here in our city. It can't be delivered by courier. It requires special clearance. I'll have to fly, just for a few hours. I'll be back this evening." He says it like a statement of fact. Logical and justified. Urgent matter. A sick relative. Medication. Everything fits together perfectly, but for Molly, his words sound like a death sentence. An icy wave washes over her. Everything inside her freezes, and then explodes with panic. This is it. This is it. The signs weren't lying. They were leading to this moment, to this plane. Her breath catches in her throat. She feels her heart start to pound wildly, thumping in her temples. She's shaking all over, a small, uncontrollable tremor, as if in a fever. He has to fly, today, right now, and she knows how it will end. Her mind races, searching for a way out. She must speak. She must stop him. But how? How to make this man, who lives by logic and facts, believe in coffee grounds and burnt shirts? He's not the type to listen to such things. He'll ridicule her. He'll order her to leave. And then he'll get in his car and drive to the airport. To his doom, she stands before him, silent and trembling, her eyes filled with terror. She feels utterly helpless. The truth that could save his life is locked inside her, and she lacks the key to deliver it to him. Her entire being protests against letting him go. But the barrier of her fear and his disbelief seems insurmountable. And in this moment of silence, while Jinho is already mentally making a to-do list before the flight, and Molly is frozen in silent despair, something unspoken hangs between them. She's on the edge. One more moment, and she'll take a step. A step through her fear. A step beyond all her rules, because she has no other choice. Jinho sets the tablet aside. His movements are measured and precise. He's about to rise to prepare for departure, but his gaze lingers on Molly again. She hasn't left. She remains standing there, rooted to the spot, her face a mask of such naked terror he's never seen before. On anyone, and especially not on his always reserved and predictable maid. Her hands are restless. They clutch and unclench the edge of her apron, then rise to adjust a non-existent strand of hair, and then fall again. Her eyes, wide open, dart across his face, unable to stop, but also unable to hold his direct, analytical gaze. She resembles a cornered animal caught in a flash of light. This isn't just anxiety anymore. This is panic. Plain and uncontrollable, and it's finally breaching his usual perception of reality. It defies logic. There's no reason for this behavior. His departure? But he's left hundreds of times, and she always calmly wishes him a safe journey. "Molly!" His voice sounds sharper than he intended. There's a hint of metal in it. "What's wrong? Talk. You're keeping me from getting ready." He sees her flinch as if struck. Her throat swallows empty air. It seems she's trying to say something, but no sound comes out. There's a struggle going on inside her, and he can see it with the naked eye. Another second, and he'll wave his hand and walk away, blaming it all on feminine nerves. But at that moment, Molly takes the most difficult step of her life. She breaks the dam. She breaks the vow she made to herself all those years ago. "You can't fly," she whispers, hoarse and cracked. "Today, not at all. Don't get on this plane." Jinho freezes. He hadn't expected this. He had expected complaints about his health, A request for time off, something mundane and understandable. Why? Is the only thing he can ask. His brain is already searching for a rational kernel. Maybe she heard something about technical problems or about the weather. He won't land. Molly's voice grows a little louder, but there's a hysterical note in it. Something terrible will happen to him. I know it. He stares at her for a few seconds, completely stunned. His well-oiled cognitive apparatus is malfunctioning. He runs through all the possible scenarios and can't find a single one in which his maid could know the plane's fate. It's absurd, pure nonsense. And then he makes a short, dry sound, like a laugh. There's no amusement in it. There's only bewilderment and mild disdain for such stupidity. Molly, he says, his tone now condescending, like that of a child telling a story. Go and rest. Drink some water. You're clearly overtired. The last few days have been stressful. You deserve a break. He turns to leave again, already mentally making a packing list for the trip. This incident is closed. He's found an explanation, nervous exhaustion, but Molly doesn't move. His laughter and his words are the last straw for her. Fear for his life suddenly turns into a furious, desperate determination. She watches him brush her aside like an annoying fly and stride toward his own death. And she can't let that happen. No! Her voice rings out, breaking into a scream. She's never raised her voice at him. Never. You have to listen to me. You'll realize later that you were wrong. You'll regret not listening to me. Jinho turns around slowly. Now his expression isn't just one of irritation, but of cold, hard stillness. His brows are drawn together, his eyes narrow. You're forgetting yourself. His voice becomes quiet and dangerous. It's like that during the most tense moments of negotiations. You're saying things you have no idea about. Calm down and get on with your work. He takes another step, and then Molly realizes. Words are useless. Persuasion is useless. Only force remains. Threat. The only thing that can make a man like him stop. Okay, she says, her voice suddenly low and firm. All the trembling disappears. She straightens up to her full, small height. Then I'm not advising, I'm demanding. You won't be flying today. He stops dead in his tracks. He can't believe his ears. What? Is the only word he can squeeze out. If you decide to fly, Molly continues, looking him straight in the eye, I'll set this house on fire, right now, or I'll sabotage your car so badly it won't move. You won't make your flight. You won't leave the country. A deathly silence falls over the room. Jinho looks at her, and all notions of reality crumble in his head. His maid. Quiet, unnoticeable Molly. She had just threatened him in plain language. Arson. Destruction of property. He slowly approaches her, closing the distance to a minimum. He looks down at her, and his gaze could incinerate her. How dare you! His words fall like blocks of ice. Who are you to speak to me in such a tone? What do you think you're doing? He speaks slowly, enunciating each word, giving her time to comprehend the depth of her madness. Your job is to make sure my house is in order, that my clothes are ironed, that food is on the table on time. Nothing more. You're a servant. You're not an advisor, not a fortune teller, and certainly not someone who can order me around or threaten me. He waits for her to break, to look away, to burst into tears, to ask for forgiveness. But Molly doesn't look away. Her eyes, filled with tears she won't let out, burn with a strange, almost inhuman fire. There's no fear of him in them. There's only a terrifying certainty of her own righteousness and a desperate determination to stop him at any cost. I don't care what you think of me right now, she says, her voice shaking again, not from fear this time, but from overwhelming emotion. I don't care if you fire me, but I'm not letting you get on that plane today. Because if you do, you'll be gone, and I won't care about your anger because you'll be alive. They stand opposite each other, master and servant, logic and faith, reality and premonition. And between them lies a chasm that words cannot bridge. Jinho sees before him not his employee, but an obsessive, dangerous fanatic. And for the first time in years, he doesn't know what to do next. His mind, his greatest weapon, is powerless against this irrational yet steely determination. Several hours passed. Jinho sat in his office, not working. He looked out the window at the darkening sky. The decision to stay hadn't been easy. It wasn't a concession, but a strategic retreat in the face of an unpredictable threat, Molly herself. The idea that she might actually set the house on fire or sabotage the car was irrational, but he wasn't about to risk his property and schedule because of her hysteria. Logic dictated it was easier to give in, verify her words, and then deal with her for certain. He canceled not only the flight, but also the dinner at the restaurant, as she had stammered later. "Just in case," she said, the same incredible fear still in her eyes. He nodded, not understanding, but already trapped in this absurdity. Evening. The house was oppressively quiet. Jinho sat in a chair in the living room, aimlessly scrolling through channels. He felt irritated, a wasted day. An important, albeit personal, mission thwarted, and a constant, oppressive feeling that he'd given in to madness. Suddenly, his attention was drawn to the sharp, alarming intonation of a newscaster on one of the news channels. The screen showed a map with the route highlighted and a photograph of the plane. "A disaster occurred this afternoon. A private jet departing our city for Seoul crashed into the sea. According to preliminary reports, the pilot and 2 crew members were on board. Rescue services are searching, but officials say the chances of finding survivors are slim. The cause of the tragedy is being investigated." Jinho froze. He held his breath. His fingers gripped the remote so tightly that his knuckles turned white. He stared at the screen, but he could no longer see it. A deafening roar filled his ears. This was his flight, the very plane he was supposed to board. At that very time, he rose slowly from his chair. His body began to tremble. First, a slight tremor in his knees, then echoes of it ran through his entire body, to his arms, to his jaw. He felt the ground slipping out from under his feet, and he had to lean against the back of the chair. He would be gone. Those words, spoken to him with such fervor, suddenly took on a monstrous, literal meaning. If he had boarded that plane, he would not be alive now. His body would likely lie at the bottom of the ocean. His world, his plans, his control, all of it would have been reduced to nothing. He closed his eyes, trying to fight off the wave of nausea and dizziness. Logic, his faithful companion, froze helplessly, having stumbled upon the impossible. It knew with absolute certainty. No assumptions, no guesses. A direct, concrete warning of a catastrophe that, by all the laws of his reality, could not happen. He turned abruptly and almost ran out of the living room, his heart pounding somewhere in his throat. "Molly!" His voice was hoarse and loud, breaking the silence of the mansion. "Molly, come here, now!" He stood at the end of the hall, still shaking, and waited. A few moments later, she appeared from the corridor, leading to the kitchen. Her face was calm but tense with anticipation. She wiped her hands on her apron. She already knew why he was calling her. She had seen the news. He looked at her, and his gaze was completely different. There was no anger, no irritation, no condescension. There was only shock bordering on awe, and a burning, insatiable curiosity. "The plane," he breathed out. "The very same one. It crashed, like you said." She nodded silently, looking down. "How?" The word burst from him, full of despair and the need to understand. "Explain to me. How is this possible? You couldn't have known this. It's impossible." Molly slowly looked up at him. She saw his state. She saw how his entire understanding of the world had collapsed. It was time. The secret she'd kept her entire life was over. She took a deep breath, gathering her thoughts. The truth would sound like madness, but today had proven that madness can be real. "I'm ready to tell you everything," she said quietly. "But it's a long story, and you might not believe me." "After what happened today," his voice was firm, but there was something broken in it. "I'm ready to believe anything. Speak." Jinho looks at Molly, his usual confidence cracking. "Explain," he says, and his voice is no longer firm. Molly takes a deep breath. She speaks clearly, without emotion, as if reporting. "All the women in my family are born with this. We see fragments of the future. My mother and grandmother used this gift for money. I didn't." She looks at him directly. "I'm afraid of making a mistake. One wrong word could ruin my life. And I'm also afraid that people like you will find out and turn me into a tool, lock me in a basement and force me to work for them. Jinho silently digests what he's heard. His world, built on logic, crumbles. Then he asks the main question, his voice growing harsher. If you knew all this time, why didn't you say anything? There were failures before, betrayals. Did you know about them? Yes, she answers without hesitation. I knew about some. Why didn't you say anything? There is a reproach in his tone. I'm ashamed, Molly says, a flicker of pain in her eyes, but her voice remains calm. But those problems weren't life-threatening. Money, reputation. I was afraid that if I started talking, you'd start asking questions, revealing my secret. I couldn't let that happen. I feared exposure more than your temporary setbacks. She pauses, looking at him. But today was different. It was the end. I couldn't remain silent. My fear of you was weaker than the fear of letting you die. Jinho leans back in his chair. He looks at this woman who just saved him at the cost of her greatest secret. The facts are indisputable. Logic is powerless, but he's alive. And he finally sees not a maid, but a man who lived in fear for years, but today chose his life. A new, heavy silence hangs between them, full of unspoken questions and broken barriers. Okay. His voice was sharp, breaking the silence. There was no gratitude or warmth in it. It was a statement. You saved my life. That's a fact. I admit it. Molly nodded silently, not knowing what would come next. Your gift, he continued, carefully crafting his words, is something I can't understand, but it works. That's a fact. Ignoring such a resource would be foolish. Criminally foolish! He leaned back in his chair, folding his hands on the table. His posture became that of a negotiator. I offer you cooperation, official. Molly's eyes widened. She'd expected anything. Anger, dismissal, a grilling, but not this. Collaboration? She asked incredulously. Yes. You will use your gift to my advantage. Warn me of threats. Help me make the right decisions at key moments. You will become my consultant on non-standard risks. A plan was already forming in his head. Her abilities could eliminate her competitors' chances, prevent failed deals, and predict the actions of the authorities. This was the key to absolute power, to a level of control he had never dreamed of before. What do I get in return? Molly asked. Her voice was quiet but firm. Fear was gradually receding, giving way to innate practicality. She had grown up poor and had never been against money. Jinho answered bluntly. Good money, 10 times your current salary, bonuses for particularly valuable information, a separate budget for all your personal needs. You won't be a servant anymore. You'll be a hired specialist, with a full benefits package. He watched her. He saw the interest sparkle in her eyes. He knew that money was a universal language, and she spoke it. And what exactly am I supposed to do? She asked. And how will we ensure my safety? If anyone finds out, no one will know. He interrupted sharply. This will be strictly between us. Your duties as a maid will remain as a cover. To everyone, you will still be Molly, the one who cleans and cooks. No official titles, no mention of anything. You will simply share your insights with me, and I will take them into account when making decisions. As for your fears about the basement, he paused briefly, a semblance of a smile tugging at his lips, devoid of warmth. It's foolish to lock a golden goose in a cage. I don't need you dead or scared. I need your gift in working order. Your freedom and relative comfort are an investment in the quality of your work. Molly listened, her mind racing as she weighed the pros and cons. Money, yes, that was a big deal. A big deal. She'd dreamed of financial independence her whole life, of being able to help her family, who were barely making ends meet. His stipulation that she maintain her position as a maid was the perfect cover. No one would suspect this man was consulting a cleaning lady about his business strategies. And most importantly, he wasn't going to lock her out. He wasn't threatening. He was talking to her like a business partner. A junior one, but still a partner. This wasn't what she'd been dreading all these years. This was even better than she could have imagined. He saw her hesitation. You will keep your secret, he said. as if reading her thoughts. I am the only one who will know, and you will get what I see you have always wanted: financial stability and the guarantee that your secret will not be discovered. I become your shield. This was the clincher. Not only was he not a threat, but he offered protection from other potential threats. Her fear of people like him began to melt. This particular man turned out to be not a monster, but a pragmatist. He was doable. Okay, she said finally. Her voice was firm and clear. I agree. I will work for you. I will use my gift to help you, in exchange for the agreed-upon terms. Excellent. Jinho nodded, a glimmer of triumph in his eyes. He pulled a blank sheet of paper and a pen from his desk. Then let's structure our agreement. We'll start with your new salary and bonus system. He began rattling off figures that made Molly's head spin. It was more than she could earn in 10 years of hard work. He talked about percentages of saved funds, bonuses for prevented losses, one-time payments for particularly important warnings. He wasn't thanking her for saving his life. He was buying her services, and she was completely fine with that approach. It was honest. It was understandable. Gratitude is ephemeral and unreliable, but a contract backed by substantial financial flows is something real and long-lasting. They sat for another hour, discussing details: how their interaction would proceed, how she would communicate her visions to him, which areas of his activity were a priority for monitoring. He asked questions, and she answered, trying to be as precise as possible. Once everything was agreed upon, he handed her a sheet of paper with the outline of their informal contract. Will that work? She glanced over the points. Everything was as they had agreed. Yes, she said. Everything suits me. Then our collaboration begins from now on, Jinho concluded. He stood up, his gaze sharp and businesslike once again. Tomorrow morning, you'll receive your first advance. And now... He glanced at his watch. It's been a busy day. You can go. Molly nodded and left the office. She went down to her room, sat on her bed, and exhaled. Her hands were still shaking from the strain, but her soul felt strangely calm. The fear that had clung to her like a stone for years was gone. Clarity took its place. She didn't become special. She became a highly paid specialist. She didn't become a prisoner. She made a lucrative deal, and the man who could have destroyed her became her main protector and defender. She went to bed, and for the first time in years, her sleep was deep and restful. She had saved a life. She had provided for herself, and she had found a way to exist with her cursed gift without losing herself. Everything was more than fine. Everything was exactly as she, with her practical mindset, could have hoped. Her world, which had shattered in the morning, had been rebuilt by evening, and now it looked even better than before. 6 months had passed since Molly and Jinho began their unusual collaboration. During this time, Jinho had grown accustomed to trusting her signs. If Molly said no, the deal was off. If she felt uneasy, all plans were reconsidered. His business empire grew and strengthened at an incredible rate, while his competitors merely shrugged their shoulders, unable to comprehend how he always seemed one step ahead. Jinho's office as usual to pick up his empty coffee cup, but this time she didn't leave right away. She stood looking out the window, her expression focused. Is something wrong? Jinho asked, putting down his tablet. I don't know, Molly answered honestly. There's one thing, a small deal, buying that dry cleaning chain. Jinho nodded. He remembered this project. Small, almost formal. The company was clean, all the paperwork in order. The price was symbolic. And? He nudged her. I see water, Molly said, choosing her words slowly. Lots of water. And a broken pipe. But it's not here. It's somewhere far away. And it's somehow connected to those dry cleaners. A very weak connection, but it's there. I wouldn't advise it. Jinho frowned. Water? A broken pipe? It sounded absurd even by the standards of their partnership. Molly, these are just 5 locations in the city, he said softly. We've checked them all out. No problems with utilities, especially plumbing. No environmental risks. This is the easiest deal I've seen in months. I'm just saying what I feel, she answered quietly. The sign is very weak, but it's there. Jinho sighed. For the first time in a long time, a hint of irritation crept into his voice. He felt like her gift was beginning to falter, becoming too general. Okay, I'll keep that in mind, he said, though he'd already decided to ignore the advice. The deal was too insignificant to give up easy profits over some vague hint of water. He signed out the documents. The deal was done. The dry cleaning chain came under his control. A week passed, then a second. Nothing happened. The dry cleaners ran like clockwork, bringing in a steady, albeit small, income. One day at dinner, Jinho remarked with a slight grin, "See? Sometimes even your instincts can be wrong. These dry cleaners are absolutely fine." No water. Molly said nothing, only lowered her eyes. Her insides clenched. What if he was right? What if her gift, which she had finally begun to rely on, was starting to fail her? The old familiar fear reared its head again. A week later, Jinho was summoned to South Korea for urgent negotiations. A multi-million-dollar contract was at stake, and his personal presence was essential. He flew away for 3 days, instructing his deputies to oversee ongoing operations. Late in the evening, on the second day of his absence, Molly couldn't sleep. A strange restlessness plagued her. She went down to the kitchen for a drink of water, and her gaze fell on the daily report Jinho always read at breakfast. His assistant had brought a copy, apparently out of habit. Lying on the table was a finished report for that very same dry cleaning chain. Nothing special, just a monthly summary. But something compelled Molly to pick it up. She scanned the columns of numbers and froze. It wasn't the report itself that caught her attention, but the logo of the contractor responsible for waste removal and disposal from those dry cleaning chains. A tiny, almost invisible icon. It depicted a drop of water and a curved pipe. An icy wave rolled down her spine. Water. A broken pipe. But what does this have to do with dry cleaners? She grabbed her tablet and began frantically searching. The name of the contractor, its history, its owners. Hour after hour, she dug until her eyes drooped with exhaustion. And then, late at night, she found it. An old, long-forgotten news item in the archives of the local newspaper in the small provincial town where the contractor's headquarters were located. 15 years ago, a major pipe ruptured at one of its old, abandoned chemical processing plants, carrying toxic waste. Contamination leaked into the groundwater. The case was hushed up, the plant was closed, the company was renamed and repurposed, but traces of the incident remained in the court records. And then everything fell into place. The dry cleaning chain itself was clean, but its waste disposal contractor, the one with the water logo, was a direct, albeit very distant, link to an old environmental disaster. The connection was tenuous, but for Molly's gift, it was enough. If this information had surfaced now, when the dry cleaners were owned by Jinho, it could have dealt a devastating blow to his reputation. He would have been accused of ties to environmental criminals and of irresponsibility. His renowned partners, with whom he was negotiating at the time, would have immediately terminated all contracts. The reputational damage would have run into the hundreds of millions. With shaking hands, Molly wrote Jinho an urgent message, briefly outlining the gist. He was still on the plane, returning home. Jinho landed that morning. After reading Molly's message, he didn't go home, but went straight to the office. He assembled his team of lawyers and analysts. Within hours, they confirmed everything Molly had found. The risk was absolutely real. That same day, Jinho pulled off a lightning-fast operation. He found a new, impeccable contractor and severed all ties with the old company before anyone even noticed. Then he quietly and discreetly sold the dry cleaning chain, walking away with a minimal profit, but completely clearing his name of any potential scandal. He returned home that evening. He was dead tired, but his mind was clear. He found Molly in her new room. She was sitting at the table and looking out the window. He stood in the doorway for a moment, then walked in and sat down opposite her. "You were right," he said quietly. 100%. Molly nodded silently. "I was an ass," Jinho continued, and for the first time his voice sounded more than just a statement of fact, but deep, genuine frustration. "I doubted you. I decided that if I couldn't logically calculate the connection, it didn't exist. I thought your gift was just a magic button that always gave a clear answer. But I was wrong. He looked at her, and in his gaze, there was a heavy, unfamiliar feeling for him. Shame. "You see the threads, Molly," he said. "The finest, most invisible threads that connect events. And I only try to see the knots. And today, I almost tore everything apart because of my pride. I almost destroyed everything we built because I thought I was smarter." He fell silent, choosing his words. "I apologize for doubting you. And I promise I'll never make that mistake again. From now on, your word is law. Even if I don't understand, even if it seems like complete nonsense to me, you see what I can't see, and I've learned to trust that." Molly looked at him, a slight, barely noticeable smile playing on her lips. There was no reproach in her eyes, only understanding. "You weren't an ass," she said quietly. "You were a person who was used to trusting only what he could understand. And this is impossible to understand. One can only accept." From that day on, their partnership reached a new level. Jinho no longer asked questions. He acted. And Molly finally completely shed the last traces of fear. She realized that her gift required no logical justification. It simply existed. And it worked. And he realized that his power now lay not only in his mind, but also in his ability to trust what lay beyond it. And that was the most valuable transaction of his life. From that evening on, a new silence reigned in the house. Not awkward, but rather peaceful. Jinho was no longer just the boss, and Molly was no longer just a servant with a secret. They were now a team. Their next test was more subtle, almost invisible. The deal involved the delivery of a batch of rare electronics. The contract was important not so much for the profit as for establishing a relationship with a new, highly secretive supplier from Switzerland. Everything was checked, packaged, and ready for shipment. At breakfast, Molly frowned as she served Jinho coffee. "Is something wrong?" he asked immediately, putting the newspaper aside. "I'm not sure," she replied, looking out the window. "It's about the new shipment. I don't see a problem." "I see. False light. And fire, but not real fire. Fire in water, or a reflection of fire." Jinho listened attentively. Previously, he would have chuckled skeptically. Now, however, his mind, like a finely tuned instrument, began searching for possible correspondences. "False light. Reflective firing," he muttered. "Perhaps we're talking about counterfeits. Fake components?" "No," Molly shook her head. "It's not about authenticity. It's about appearance. Everything appears correct, but the reflection is distorted." He nodded, deep in thought. He canceled several unimportant meetings and immersed himself in the contract details. He checked the specifications, certificates, and routes over and over again. Everything was perfect. The day of shipment arrived. Jinho, despite Molly's misgivings, gave the go-ahead. The risk of delay seemed greater than the hypothetical threat of false light. 3 days later, a message arrived. The shipment had arrived safely at the warehouse in Hong Kong. Jinho felt a slight disappointment, maybe even a hint of irritation. Molly had been wrong. Her gift, so reliable when dealing with large, obvious threats, had misfired on something complex and subtle. He didn't tell her about it. But that evening, at dinner, his silence spoke louder than any words. Molly sensed his doubts. She began to doubt herself. Perhaps the false light was just a figment of her imagination. On the 5th day, everything changed. The Swiss supplier himself called. His voice was icy. He accused Jinho of unprofessionalism and borderline fraud. It turned out that the entire shipment, despite the perfect packaging and documentation, had been delivered to the wrong warehouse. Not Jinho's private, secure terminal, but a neighboring state-owned one with less stringent controls. Due to a bureaucratic error somewhere along the logistics chain, the cargo had been held there for nearly 48 hours. And during those 48 hours, as it later turned out, someone had gained access to it. Not to steal, but to scan, to extract the unique firmware from the chips. False light. The technology was intact, but its uniqueness, its soul, had been copied. Now competitors could replicate it. The damage wasn't financial, but strategic. The Swiss trust that Jinho had spent years building was shattered in an instant. the supplier severed all ties. Jinho stood in his office, looking out over the evening city. He wasn't angry. He felt emptiness and a burning shame. He hadn't trusted her again. He'd heard her words, but he hadn't listened to their essence. He was looking for counterfeiting, sabotage, theft, something tangible. And the threat being in the distortion of information, in the reflection, in the fact that everything looked right but led in the wrong direction. He went down to the kitchen. Molly was washing the dishes. She didn't turn around when she heard his footsteps. "You warned me about the false light," he said quietly. "Yes," she answered just as quietly, continuing to wash the cup. It was the wrong warehouse. The documents pointed to one warehouse, but the shipment was going to another. Everything looked correct, but it was a mistake. Reflective fire. They copied the technology. They didn't steal the product, but its essence. Molly finally turned off the water and turned around. Her face was calm. "I didn't know the details. I just felt like the path was distorted." Jinho came closer and leaned against the kitchen table. He looked tired, truly tired, not from work, but from his own blindness. "I wasn't listening to you again, Molly. I was listening to your words, but I was trying to force them into my own logic. I was looking for an explosion when I should have been looking for a navigational error. I failed you, and I failed us both." There was no justification in his voice, only a statement of bitter fact. "I'm sorry. I'm sorry that my mind is sometimes so slow to learn." Molly looked at him. She saw his shame, his disappointment in himself. And for the first time, she felt not guilt, but something else. Responsibility. The responsibility of being his guide in a world he couldn't understand. "You didn't let me down," she said firmly. "You're learning, just like me. I'm learning to trust my instincts, and you're learning to trust me. Today was a hard lesson, but we learned it." She smiled, a small, barely noticeable smile. "Next time I sense a false light, the first thing you do is check the logistics and routes." Jinho looked at her, and the tension in his shoulders finally began to ease. Her words weren't forgiveness. They were a statement of a new rule of the game. "Their game?" "Yes," he said simply. "That's what we'll do." He turned and left. Molly was left alone in the kitchen again. But her loneliness no longer weighed on her. She was needed. Her strange, illogical gift was more than just a tool. It was part of a system, part of a team. And her partner had finally learned not just to listen, but to hear. Several weeks had passed since the false light incident. Jinho had become even more attentive to Molly's every word. But now a new, strange note had entered his attention. He began to notice not only the essence of her warnings, but also her personality. One evening, he was lingering in his office, sorting through a complex financial report. The house was silent, and he was about to go to bed when he smelled the faint scent of jasmine tea. He stepped out into the hallway and saw a light shining from under her bedroom door. He stood for a moment, then, without really understanding why he was doing it, he knocked softly. "Come in," she said. Molly was sitting in a chair by the window, wrapped in a large blanket, reading a book. A cup of tea stood on the nightstand. "Are you still awake?" she asked, surprised to see him. Jinho entered and stood uncertainly in the middle of the room. He felt out of place. This was her territory. "I can't sleep. What about you?" he asked, trying to sound natural. "Me too." She closed the book. Sometimes after strong impressions, after visions, it's hard to sleep. The thoughts won't go away. He nodded, not fully understanding her, but accepting her as fact. "What are you reading?" He took a step closer, glancing. At the book. "Poems." She was a little embarrassed. "Old ones. Korean." This surprised him. "Do you know Korean?" "A little. I'm learning. To understand the context." She lowered her eyes. It was a half-truth. She was teaching him to be a little closer to his world, to his past, which he never talked about. Jinho looked at her silently. In the soft light of the nightlight, she seemed different. Not a servant, not an oracle, but simply a young woman, fragile and tired. "Read something," he asked unexpectedly. Molly looked at him in surprise, but after a brief pause, She opened the book and began reading quietly, stumbling slightly over unfamiliar words. Her voice was soft and melodic. He didn't understand all the words, but the rhythm and quiet sadness of the verses brought an unexpected peace to his soul. He listened, looking out the dark window, and felt the tension of the day gradually ease away. For the first time in years, someone was sharing his silence, not out of fear or duty, but simply because. From that evening on, it became their ritual. Not every night, but often. When he couldn't sleep, he'd knock on her door, sit in the chair opposite her, and she'd read him poetry. Sometimes they'd drink tea in silence. Neither of them spoke of it out loud. It was their personal, private space, built on top of their work relationship. One afternoon, Jinho was passing the kitchen and saw Molly humming a tune to herself as she prepared dinner. It was the same melody from the poems she'd read the day before. He stopped, his heart aching with a strange, warm feeling. Gradually, the boundaries began to blur in other matters too. Now he sometimes asked her opinion on matters other than business. "Do you think these curtains are too dark for the living room?" Or, "Should I buy this painting?" The questions were trivial, but they held a different meaning. "I care what you think, not as a seer, but as a person." Molly, in turn, began to take the initiative. She learned that he had played badminton in his youth, and one evening, seeing him particularly tired, she said hesitantly, "We have a court in the backyard. If you want, we could play a game to unwind." He stared at her, then laughed. A real easy laugh, the kind she'd heard from him only a few times. "Can you play?" "No, but I'll learn." They were playing, he in expensive trousers and a shirt, and she in a simple dress. He was teaching her how to hold a racket, and their laughter echoed through the evening garden. At that moment, there was no boss and maid, no seer, and no logician. There were simply a man and a woman who had found unexpected consolation to each other. One day, after a particularly difficult day filled with threats and uncertainty, Jinho was sitting in the living room, staring into space. Molly entered and silently placed a cup of hot chocolate in front of him. Not coffee, but a sweet, childish drink. She noticed that in the most difficult moments, he subconsciously sought out something reminiscent of simplicity. He looked at the cup, then at her. His eyes held a weariness and a vulnerability he never showed anyone. "Thank you," he said quietly. And after a pause, he added, "Not just for this, for everything." It was more than just gratitude from an employee. It was recognition. Molly sat down next to him without asking permission. "We can handle this," she said simply. And he believed. Not her gift, but her. Her confidence, her calm. He reached out and covered her hand with his. Her hand was warm. She didn't pull hers away. They sat like that in silence, and in the quiet of the house, something new was born. Something fragile and real. Something far more frightening and beautiful than any business risk. They were no longer just partners. They were becoming each other's support. And both understood there was no turning back. Exactly 1 year has passed since Molly first broke her rule. A year that changed both their lives forever. Their working relationship had evolved into something more. Jinho no longer simply used her gift. They had become partners in the truest sense of the word. Every morning began with a breakfast meeting. He would brief her on upcoming tasks, plans, potential threats. She listened, her internal radar scanning the information, searching for the slightest false note in perfectly constructed schemes. She learned to better understand and articulate her feelings. Instead of vague, "I see water," she could say, "There's a risk in the supply chain. Check the disposal contractor." Her gift became a precise instrument, and his logic the hand that guided it. But the most significant change occurred in their personal relationship. The strict line between boss and maid blurred. Now they were Jinho and Molly, a man and a woman bound first by necessity and then by something deeper. Their poetry reading evenings became a tradition. Sometimes he himself would bring a book into her room, an old volume of Korean poetry that had once belonged to his mother. He would sit in a chair and she would read to him, and he would close his eyes and listen. And for the first time in years, his face would take on a genuine, unclouded calm. They dined together, not as master and servant, but as two people sharing the day's impressions. He talked about his triumphs and difficulties, she about her discoveries and doubts. He learned to joke, and she learned to laugh at his. One evening, sitting in the garden, he asked, "Have you ever thought about leaving? Starting your own life? With what I pay you, you could live anywhere, however you wanted." Molly looked at him, and there was no doubt in her eyes. "No, never. This is my life. This is my home." And he realized that for him, too, this had become true. This house, which had once been simply a luxurious apartment, was filled with warmth. Now it was a living space where he was welcomed, where he was cared for, not out of duty, but out of the heart. But their peaceful life couldn't last forever. One night, Molly woke up in the middle of the night from a nightmare. She didn't see any specific images, but she was pierced by a chilling feeling of fear mixed with burning hatred. And this feeling was directed at Jinho. She burst into his bedroom without knocking. He woke instantly, his hand reaching for the gun in the nightstand. "What happened?" His voice was hoarse from sleep, but collected. "Follow me. Now." Her voice trembled, but was full of determination. She led him through dark corridors to the farthest room, an old, windowless storage room that was rarely used. As soon as the door slammed behind them, the mansion's alarm went off. A window shattered somewhere on the ground floor. A few minutes later, armed footsteps echoed throughout the house. It was a well-planned attack. The rivals Jinho had brought to their knees thanks to Molly decided to eliminate him once and for all. They sat in complete darkness, their backs pressed against the cold wall. Jinho clutched the pistol in his hand. He could hear Molly breathing heavily. "You knew," he said quietly. It wasn't a question, but a statement. "I felt it. Their hatred. It was physical. But I didn't see when or how," she whispered. Suddenly, footsteps were heard right outside the door. Someone tugged at the handle. Jinho froze, ready to shoot, but Molly grabbed his hand sharply. Her fingers were icy. "No," she breathed out, barely audibly. "Don't move. Be quiet." She closed her eyes, surrendering completely to her gift. She didn't see the future. She felt the present. She sensed the anger and impatience of the man behind the door. And she knew as surely as something breathing, that if they sat quietly, he would leave. The footsteps did indeed stop and then recede. They remained in the storage room for another hour until their own security team arrived and killed all the attackers. When they emerged, the house was full of people. But Jinho saw only Molly. Her face was pale, but her eyes were shining. In that moment, he understood everything completely. She was more than just his secret weapon. She was his shield, his guardian angel. And he would do anything to protect her as she protected him. A week later, when order had been restored, he came to her room. He held not a book, but a small velvet box. "I don't know how to speak beautiful words," he said, looking at her seriously. "And I won't promise you eternal love, because I don't believe in words. I believe in actions, in facts." He opened the box. Inside was a simple gold bracelet, not an engagement ring, not a symbol of ownership, but a sign of connection, partnership. "The fact is," he continued, "that my world without you is chaos, that my life without you is meaningless. The fact is, I trust you more than anyone on this earth, and I want you to stay with me, not as a servant, not as a seer, as Molly, as the person without whom I can't breathe." Molly looked at the bracelet and then at him. There were tears in her eyes, but they were tears of relief and happiness. She held out her hand to him. "I already told you once, this is my home. Where you are, there is my home." He fastened the bracelet on her wrist. His fingers were firm and confident. Then he looked up at her, and a real living fire burned in his usually cold gaze. "I will protect you until the end of my days. This is my decision, my logic, my only possible path." She smiled through her tears and placed her hand on his cheek. It was the first time she had touched him like this, of her own free will. "And I will ensure that your path is safe. This is my gift, and my choice." Their story began with salvation. It continued with partnership. And it ended. No, not ended, but took on a new form. The form of union. A union of logic and intuition, strength and tenderness, past and future. Two lonely people who found in each other not just salvation, but true, unconditional love. And in this union, they were invincible.